Miles, Adam Schefter tweeted out today on Monday that the Bears are likely to deal the top pick in the draft, which is really a totally unsurprising note. What it means is that clearly they're going to keep Justin Fields. I don't know anybody other than talk show hosts who basically wanted Justin Fields traded by the Bears. Justin Fields has been a C+ to B quarterback, rookie quarterback in his first and second year. Hasn't been great, but he hasn't been Zach Wilson either. And I think that it's ridiculous to trade up to take Justin Fields. He has 1.5 good years overall with a bad supporting cast. And then you talk about trading him. I think it's a much better idea to hold on to him and to trade down. Your thoughts?
I would agree with you. Look, I mean, this is the critical third season, right? Because after that, then the Bears have to decide whether or not they're going to pick up his fifth-year option. But I think that you've seen enough with Justin Fields to understand that the tools are there, right? It's not like we're talking about a quarterback who we think can't throw, he can't hit a pass, or he can't do anything with his legs, right? And that makes him really effective as a QB. We've seen Justin Fields do some incredible things. Now, the Bears haven't won that many games, but it's like you said, Peter, if you put a better supporting cast around him, then who knows what happens. And so even though it was a different regime that drafted him, yes, I think he has shown enough where you're saying to yourself, let's continue to work with these tools. Let's continue to see if we can craft a good team, and let's see what he does in his third year. And if you have to pull the ripcord after that, then that's a different story. But I think right now, there's no reason really to pull it on Justin Fields when you don't have, let's call it an Andrew Luck, right, coming out in the draft. And that's not to say that Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, Richardson, those guys, they're not going to be really good players. But there's nobody to that level of the Andrew Luck or even the Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, where you're like, no, that's why you get the ejector seat on this particular quarterback for the other one.
I thought Daniel Jeremiah made a great point to me that over the last 12 drafts, there have been 6 times where a team has traded higher into the top 5 of the draft. In other words, they were either outside the top 5 or they were in the top 5 and then traded up even higher, as the Bears did in 2017 with Mitchell Trubisky. And in every case, here are the 6 players that teams traded up to get. And by the way, traded more than 100% as dictated by the old Jimmy Johnson trade chart, which is certainly not gospel, but it's interesting. But anyway, here are the 6 quarterbacks: Robert Griffin III, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, Mitchell Trubisky, Sam Darnold, Trey Lance. It is just startling when you look at some of the trades that were made to go and get those players. And look, it's possible that Trey Lance may turn into a big star. No one has given up on him yet, but there's not a single one of those quarterbacks. The closest one is Goff. There's not a single one of those quarterbacks who's become a big star. And I thought Jeremiah made a really, really good point to me when he said, essentially, think about, these pieces, and this is my words, not Jeremiah's, but Carolina's sitting there at number 9. They've got an absolutely desperate owner in David Tepper, who wants a long-term starting quarterback yesterday. And how great would it be if there he is sitting, on the border of North and South Carolina, basically on the border of the deep South. And if they could get the Alabama quarterback who has been great for the last 2 years. And look, I'm not saying that Bryce Young is going to be a great NFL player. I don't think anybody knows if he really will be. However, if they could trade up if Carolina could trade up and get Bryce Young, you might be looking at a package that would approach what I'm about to say, that would approach, in order for the first pick in the draft, for Chicago to trade down, they could come away with the 9th pick in the draft this year, which is Carolina's first round pick, Carolina's second round pick, which is 39 overall, and first round picks in each of the next 2 drafts. And you might say, oh my God, that's way, way too much. Well, the problem is there are desperados in the top 10 of the draft. Houston picks 2, Indianapolis 4, Vegas 7, Carolina 9. They all need quarterbacks. So I will not be surprised if somebody in that lineup gives Chicago an offer it can't refuse.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
No, I mean, it's interesting because there are so many teams that seem to want to go the route of young quarterback as opposed to veteran quarterback. And when you do that, I mean, it's a team construction question too, right? How do you make sure that your team is at its best from the standpoint of your contracts and also who the players are? So if you're going with a young QB, that means that you have more flexibility to add guys in free agency, to trade for players that may be disgruntled in other places and then give them big contracts, kind of like we saw what the Philadelphia Eagles did with A.J. Brown last year because they've got Jalen Hurts on the rookie deal. So you can do different things if you say, all right, let's use our draft capital and move up and get this guy that we really like in the draft, as opposed to maybe waiting for Aaron Rodgers to see what he's going to do, or signing somebody like Derek Carr, or then going somewhere and getting more of a bridge quarterback, perhaps like a Jimmy Garoppolo, right? There's still options on the table, but if you really want that homegrown guy, then sometimes you've got to give up a lot to go get him, especially if you're going to try to do it at number 1 overall.
I'm not sure how it's all going to fall, Miles, but I sense that there's going to be some significant difference of opinion on the best quarterback in the draft. And the reason I would say that is that, Bryce Young may measure, I'm just going to guess, 5'11 and a half, something like that. There are going to be some teams that are not going to like that, period. And they might just say, hey, look, CJ Stroud's 4.5 inches taller than he is. He's got a more electric arm than Bryce Young does, even though Young can make every throw. Will Levis probably has the best arm of the 3 of them. And obviously, the wild card guy, Anthony Richardson from Florida, has a terrific arm too. But I wonder whether those 4 to 4.5 inch difference between Stroud and Bryce Young is going to be a difference maker for some teams in the top 5 of the draft.
I don't think it's just the height too. I think it could be the weight. Bryce Young is slight. So whether he comes in, I don't know, somewhere from 180 to 190 pounds, I don't know exactly what it would be. But, that's another thing that teams take into account, because your quarterback has to be available. So that durability factor does come into play a little bit. And I don't necessarily think that those things are disqualifying, let's say, for Bryce Young to be drafted early. I don't think that has to be the case at all. But it's something that teams have to think about, right? There are exceptions, yes. But by and large, teams have all this data that they've collected of players who are successful at their positions, right? This goes back years and years and years and years and years. And so that's why when you talk about a quarterback being a little shorter, a quarterback being a little slighter of weight, that's why you have to say, all right, we can have this data, but then also what does the tape say? But what does also our research say? And how do we all put this puzzle together so that we get what we believe is going to be an accurate picture and an accurate projection of what this guy can be in his NFL career? It's a lot that goes into it.
I think it's pretty logical to suggest that Young and Stroud in some form go 1 and 2. I think the big question is whether Anthony Richardson could pass Will Levis. Will Levis took a lot of sacks last year. in a rebuilding year at Kentucky. And he threw a bunch of picks. He didn't have a great year. He had a toe injury. He had a shoulder injury. He lost Wan'Dale Robinson, who was his security blanket in 2021. So, I think there's going to be some skepticism about Will Levis. I'm skeptical about him because the guy puts mayonnaise in his coffee. And I'm dead serious. There's a video out there of Will Levis squirting a huge amount of mayonnaise in his coffee, swirling it around with a spoon, and taking a big sip of this formerly black coffee, but now coffee ruined with thick, gooey mayonnaise. I'm sure that I caused a few people in the last 14 seconds to vomit while on the treadmill listening to this podcast. But anyway, Levis, I've thought he'd be a great guy to go to Josh McDaniels, because McDaniels is one of those guys, he loves the project. And McDaniels has done a really good job with Jarrett Stidham. I could see McDaniels saying, let's sign Jarrett Stidham for the next 2 years. He's a free agent. Let's sign Jarrett Stidham. Let's draft Will Levis and bring him along slowly. And who knows? Stidham might win this job and force Levis to have to go elsewhere. But anyway, I think Vegas would be interesting. The other guy, Anthony Richardson, Myles, I don't know what you've heard about him, but over the weekend, making some very cursory calls about the quarterbacks, and there's a tremendous amount of interest in Anthony Richardson. Even though he only won 6 games at Florida and only started for 1 year at Florida, I think there's fascination with him because, this is a guy who had touchdown runs of 80 and 81 yards while at Florida, 6'4", 232, a huge guy, and yet runs like a rabbit. I think he could be a really, really interesting project for some coach out there.
Yeah, you watch the highlights and he looks the part, right? You just said, those runs that he had for touchdowns, they're electrifying, and it's something that you don't often see out of the quarterback position, especially. And he has the arm talent to make the throws, it looks like, but it's just, can you be consistent, right? Can you make the throws? Can you make the layups? To quote Indianapolis GM Chris Ballard, the throws that you have to make that are closer to the line of scrimmage, how do you do that? So I think that if you go to the right system and you are around a coach that can patiently teach you everything that you need to learn, there certainly is great potential for Anthony Richardson, but it becomes, man, where does he go? And is there so much pressure for him to play early on that he doesn't get the time to marinate and develop the way he might need to? So that to me is going to be really interesting to see, like, where he falls in the draft, because if you're a first round pick, then ostensibly they've got 5 years to see what you can do, right? Because of the 5th-year option. If you go later than that, then you're kind of on the clock almost a little bit sooner in some ways, because you're only
almost
have 4
Desmond
years.
Ritter.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's going to be really interesting. I don't know exactly what everybody thinks about him, neither does anybody. But, when you have a prospect like that where there's so much projection and there hasn't been as much film that you can really look at, it becomes, how do you get him to the right place where he can succeed?
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.